Okay, hi everyone. My name is Ahmar, and as you can see, my thesis title is changed slightly. So there was a really wonderful quote from one of my participants that really captured, I think, the essence of what I was looking into. So the title now is Creating Space in a Busy and Complex System, exploring the factors that impact how educational psychologists support teachers with work-related stress. And I've done my absolute best to try and condense this into 10 minutes, so kind of keep me to task. So just a kind of personal background as to why I'm kind of interested in this area. So I've spent around 10 years working in education, primarily in primary education, working with children with challenging behavior. Had lots of different roles, but one of my roles was as a senior learning mentor. And I had an unofficial role when I had that job, and that was supporting the teachers to manage the children who had the challenging behavior. And as I developed the relationships with teachers, I began to realize that they were unhappy, overly stressed, and what they were commonly saying is that the workload is too high. And I saw a lot of colleagues not just leave the school, but leave the profession because of the high workload. I then left education for a little while, spent some time in health, in a CAM service where I was a mental health clinician for a little while. And then I got introduced to this wonderful thing called supervision. And I was like, wow, this is incredible, not just a space to kind of talk about some of the challenging cases or whatnot, but also talk about me and how I'm managing my workload. Also, that the paradigm in health was quite different. So in education, to ask for help is to be kind of seen as struggling, you're a bad professional, but actually in this paradigm, you were a bad therapist if you weren't talking to your colleagues. And I thought, actually, there's something that health could perhaps teach education about how we need to be interacting with each other. And then I kind of found out about educational psychology and what educational psychologists do. And I thought, okay, maybe there are professionals already in the education system who can support to kind of help this paradigm shift. So my research aims were to explore exactly how EPs can support teachers with work-related stress, but I was interested in exploring that through the lens of educational psychologists and SENCOs, because as most of us know, SENCOs are primarily the co-constructors of our work, so I thought it was really important to get their views. So, existing literature, unsurprisingly, I think lots of us know that teachers are leaving the profession due to high and excessive workload. There was mixed evidence about the increase of teacher stress during the pandemic. I think earlier on, it was talking about senior leads being slightly more stressed in the kind of March 2020, if you can kind of put your memory back 2 years ago, and class teachers being less stressed. But I think that was more to do with the fact that very early on, there was no such thing as online learning and remote learning. So I think that probably explains a little bit about that. There were only 2 previously published studies that explicitly compared the views of EPs and SENCOs, and I thought that was quite fascinating because it's such an important relationship and determines pretty much the work that we do in schools. And where EPs have worked most successfully supporting whole school systems with mental health and well-being, so we've worked systemically as opposed to kind of just one-off bits of work. So these are my research questions. What do EPs and SENCOs think about the role that EPs have in supporting teachers to manage stress? What does that support look like? What are the barriers to that support? And how has COVID impacted the work that EPs do with teachers? So my participants were year 2 and year 3 DEdPsy and qualified EPs. It was primary school SENCOs. I decided to go just for primary school because of the kind of different ways of working in secondary school. And I had 105 participants take part in the research, and that was 56 EPs and 49 SENCOs. So I had a mixed method approach. So the first stage of data collection was a questionnaire, and that was sent out to both SENCOs and EPs. And the idea was then to analyze the data from the survey. And I used descriptive statistics, so percentages, to then inform what would go on to be the second stage of data collection, which was the follow-up semi-structured interview. So essentially, my idea was to get lots of interesting information, compare the percentages between different items with SENCOs and EPs, and then drill down further, hopefully, in interview stage. So I did 10 semi-structured interviews, 5 with SENCOs, 5 with EPs, and then kind of compared and contrasted. So the key findings from the survey, only 38% of Senkos felt that EPs had a role to play in reducing teacher stress, and that was compared to 98% of EPs. So quite a stark finding there and disparity. And actually, there's a finding in my second stage that I think helps us to understand that discrepancy. And I think some of you might have pre-guessed what that might be. Both Senkos and EPs felt that teacher stress had in fact increased during the pandemic. This was quite interesting. So EPs felt that group and one-to-one supervision was a type of work that had the biggest impact on reducing teacher stress, whereas Senkos felt that it was staff training and consultations. I thought it was quite interesting, the two different attributions of the type of work. And the last finding I've put there is that EPs and Senkos reported that the nature of EP work had changed due to the reduction of face-to-face work. So these are the interview themes. They're not super clear on there, so I'll kind of pick out the main themes. So the one that really sticks out to me is the second crossover theme, which was Senko uncertainty of the EP role. And that was coming from Senkos saying that, okay, we're not quite sure what it is that EPs do, but EPs were saying we're not actually sure that Senkos are aware of what we do. And in terms of kind of understanding the discrepancy on that first stage of data collection, what do EPs and Senkos think about our role with reducing teacher stress? Well, it's quite logical. If they're not aware of the kind of the menu of support that we can offer, they're not necessarily going to think about using our skills perhaps outside of areas like pupil assessment. Limited to access to EPs came out as a challenge, but recognized by EPs and Senkos. And also teachers not being the priority. So even in cases where Senkos say, yeah, actually, yeah, I'm aware that you could do this, we've got all these other priorities, and actually teachers are not seen as a priority area. If I draw your attention to the second theme, Senko theme, creating space in a busy and complex system, and I thought that was a really nice way that Senkos captured the work that we do in school. So even in the first stage of data collection, when they were kind of saying, EPs don't really have kind of a role to play in this area. Actually, when we did the interviews, they were describing all these interactions that EPs were either having with the Senkos themselves in planning meetings or in consultation, that they spoke about kind of creating that space, that reflective space to think or to kind of confirm their thinking as to what might be happening for particular children. And I thought that was a really valuable finding. So the limitations of my study, the majority of the participants worked in England. We did have participants from Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, but in terms of kind of confidently generalizing that data, it kind of is more representative, thank you, of participants in England, and the majority of the interview participants worked in London. So when I was looking at the themes, just having to be careful about not making too wild statements. So the strengths of the study, it's the largest study to compare the views of EPs and Senkos specifically. And the participants were representative of 57 local authorities across England, Scotland, and Wales. So, you know, I would say it's a fairly representative sample snapshot of certainly EP and Senko views throughout England, if not the UK. It provided evidence that teacher stress had increased during the pandemic, and as confirmed by other professionals. So most of the other literature that talks about teacher workload and teacher stress is kind of self-report from teachers themselves. But this study has got two professionals who are not every day inside the classroom also validating and confirming that view that yes, teachers are really stressed, and actually, yeah, I believe it's due to the high and excessive workload. And the study also presents some empirical evidence of both some of the opportunities and the limitations of the development of working practices as we kind of traverse through the pandemic. And the conclusion, and I'll read it because I don't think I can kind of paraphrase it more articulately than I put it in my thesis. So my study assertively argues that EP should be afforded a greater role in supporting teachers. Absolutely, and you know, even in the interviews, Senkos were saying, actually, we're already doing that. I think that we could be doing more of that. However, while it's evident that EPs could be doing more to support teachers to manage work-related stress, to focus solely on the EP contribution and ignore the wider context will be to treat the symptom and not the root problem. So the root problem here clearly is the excessive expectations, stress levels, workload that teachers have. So yes, while I'm arguing we could be doing more, and we actually are quite active in supporting teachers to reduce stress, but actually the bigger problem is actually identifying and dealing with the root cause, which is excessive teacher workload. And